Hello and welcome to this episode of the Parents in PR podcast, a mini-series within Sparks by PRCA. I'm Alex Stevens, founder of Parents in PR and business director at Reuben, Sinclair, and today I'm joined by Jo Tanner. Jo is now a senior director at APCO and is also described as a political strategist by the media, where she appears as a regular commentator after 25 years of political campaigns for both politicians and those in the public sector, corporate and charity worlds. She spent some of that time running her own agency in Westminster, as well as working for a government agency and in charities. Jo also founded and runs the Parliamentary Women's Football Team, sits on a primary academy trust board, and is trustee of a mental health charity working to prevent teenage suicide. Jo has been the principal carer for her disabled mother for almost 30 years and is a single mum to her 16-year-old son. Those responsibilities led her to make some big changes in her life, which I'm sure we will get on to discussing today. But first of all, thank you so much for joining me, Jo.
Really good to be here.
Thank you. I am genuinely in awe of how you managed to juggle so many different roles, and just reading out your kind of bio there, I'm almost tripping over my words because there's so much to include. But I wanted to kind of talk to you first about your role, obviously as a carer to your mother while also bringing up your son. It's such a huge responsibility. I mean, being a working parent is a tough job, as millions will attest to, but being also a primary carer to a parent presents a challenge that I personally can't even begin to comprehend. When you had your son, I guess you were already caring for your mother and running your own business. I mean, what was your experience of becoming a working parent like?
Oh gosh. Well, it was weird actually, because it happened. It's funny when you grow up, you become sexually active and you spend so much of your time trying to prevent yourself from getting pregnant. And then when I actually decided I wanted to try for a baby, it happened incredibly quickly. So I was very fortunate. Sadly, actually, after I had my son, I couldn't have any more children despite trying, but I was very lucky to get pregnant quite quickly with him. But the problem was I was also running the PR for Boris Johnson's 2008 mayoral campaign, which was sort of the biggest client that my agency had at the time. And so it was weird because I'd basically made sort of a huge error really by everything happening at once. But I think that's sort of the moral of this is that actually some things just can't be planned, and as much as we would like them to be, they're not necessarily. My parents got divorced when I was in my 20s, and I ended up taking responsibility for my mum who's got MS, and that was never part of my journey or the map that I ever saw. I thought I was just going to get married and have a family and life would be wonderful. And of course, things get thrown at you and you don't know what to do at that time. So to be honest, I sort of made it all up as I went along. And I think there's something about people that work in this industry that we're probably quite resourceful, and we do manage to do that. We had the sort of early advancements of tech, so mobile phones and some of the capability. I mean, we're talking a long time ago. 16 years ago was when 17 now, when I got pregnant with my son. And so we had tools, we had things we could use to make things a little bit easier. But at the same time, I think we were still working out where did that balance sort of sit around when to take a phone call or when to do your emails if you therefore weren't in an office environment. And I'm sure I spent far too much time keeping in touch with work when I had a small baby in my arms. And, I do look back and think, was I as good a parent at certain times in that period as I could have been? Honestly, to people out there with young kids, the answer is you don't know. My son's just turned 16, and I now know I got most of it pretty much right. But I've had conversations with him where I've said, did I get that balance right at times? And we've talked quite openly about it.
I think purely by having that conversation, it shows you care, and that's the best part of being a parent. I think if you're a good parent, you're a caring parent, and simply by asking him that question shows that you did. But yeah, it must have. I can't even begin to imagine the juggle. And you mentioned that again, you've been a primary carer for your mother for the last 30 years. So did that? I mean, clearly that would have had an impact on your juggle with work and with a new son as well. How did you manage to kind of balance it all?
I got good support where I could. I was as honest as I could be about my situation, and I'm sure that is a brave thing to do, and you have to be a certain type of personality that's prepared to talk about your situation. But With clients, I always made it clear that I would also be available out of hours. You know, if it meant I couldn't make a meeting at a certain time, but I would definitely be around all day, or fill me in on the phone or something. I did take time off. I had 6 months off with my son. I didn't take any longer, but I also was, you know, the co-founder of a business, had supportive team. I wouldn't say I could make the rules myself, because I had a business partner and I had a team to be responsible for. So I did take 6 months off, but I also checked in during that time. But the period, probably the more difficult bit was actually when I was pregnant, and being pregnant and then also having Boris Johnson, the other clients, the work that we had, and my mum, sourcing really good support, using every available route, and having every battle I had to have, whether it was for care services for my mum, whether it was like I said, using tech, whether it was just being honest about why I couldn't be at something. And you couldn't dial into meetings and stuff then. If it was now, and it has been, you know, more recent years, there's so much more that I've been able to do. But you know, there have definitely been points in my life where I've just had to be super honest and say, look, you know, everything hit the fan this morning. It's all gone wrong. My son's ill, my mum's unwell, the carers have let me down, something's happened, you know. And in a way, I think if you're diligent and you're professional at every point you can be, when things do go wrong, and because you've been honest and people know your situation, most of the time you'll cut a bit of slack.
Yeah.
But I think there is and I don't know if it's a woman thing. I actually have a partner now who's got 2 children that he's been responsible for a significant period, in a very, very high profile job, very big job. And actually he's been much more open with his employer about what he's not in PR, but in his world, he's been open about his responsibilities. And actually, it's funny how when you speak more about it, when you're more open about it, people sort of, I don't want to say they factor it in, because I don't want to say, oh, they think you're not going to be able to do a good job, but they sort of, it's not a huge shock then if you have to let somebody down in some way, because it's worse if then the whole story's coming out at that point. If actually they understand and they, you know, I talk about it in media work I do. I think being open about the challenges, but also, quite frankly, embracing it. I actually think a lot of us develop as PR professionals, as people that understand consumers better, people that understand the political world better, when we are parents. I'm not saying you have to be a parent to be good at your job, but it does add a dimension to you that in the mix of people that you work with, it does, you know, it does sort of give you a perspective that is relevant. And I don't think we should sort of be ashamed to admit that we've got caring responsibilities, whatever they might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to come on to that in a minute about sort of being more vocal about parenting responsibilities, because I think that's huge. But I also want to touch on a point that you just mentioned about and about seeking support and having a really good sort of support network around you, because clearly that's going to make such a big difference in terms of helping you manage a balance. Where can people within sort of public affairs turn to for support? Like, how much of that responsibility should fall on an employer, for example, in terms of providing that support? Is there an onus on employers to kind of get involved? Where do they draw the line in terms of support that they should offer for people in care?
I suppose it's what does the support look like? I mean, nowadays there's a lot more that employers can do, because employers can say, like, we'll dial you into that meeting if you need to work from home and stuff. There are practical things, but you know, an employer can't help me get a carer in to get my mum out of bed. You know, there is a practicality, right, as to the limits to what employers can do. And I have to say, I think the biggest thing employers can do is foster a culture where teamwork and that sort of helping each other out is really appreciated and valued. I think we don't necessarily, I think we can get into situations, PR particularly, where we've got people that are, you know, revenue generators, and there's sort of a competition of who's bringing in the most business and stuff. Well, actually, do we really give proper credit to the person who's messing about with the slides and making sure that, you know, someone's great ideas actually look good on screen? And, you know, the person that I can talk for England, but, you know, give me a call online where I've got to be in control of sharing my screen and bringing all the documents up, and we might as well just give up. It's just not my I get a bit flustered when I'm sort of trying to do the two things at the same time. And, you know, the power, the real people that sort of I don't want to say do the work, because we all do the work, but there is something about teams, and I think that isn't necessarily an employer's duty, but it's partly about how you conduct yourself. So, you know, if you've got colleagues who've got responsibilities, caring responsibilities, their parents, whatever it is, a health condition, they're just having a bad day, remember to help them when you can. Because I think the point is those people will row in for you when you need them. And so, you know, there've been times I've had colleagues who've had difficulties, and I've sort of said, look, do you want me to run this meeting? Do you want to duck it? Don't feel you've got to get yourself into the office. I know things are a bit tough at the moment. Send a bottle of wine or a bunch of flowers to someone who's having a rubbish time, because I think it's about remembering that the people you work with are, most of the time, a lot of those people become your friends, right? You spend a disproportionate amount of time at work. You don't have to like everybody you work with, but you certainly got to tolerate each other. And I think for employers, what you want is you want your team to be showing a team to clients or to sort of other parts of the business. And I think there's an important point that we have to foster that ourselves. So we have to make sure that we are keeping the ladder there for other women that are coming through. We are recognizing the person that is having a rough time in their relationship. You know, we were all young once and we got dumped and it was miserable. And, you know, some 25-year-old in the office who's having a crappy time about that, you know, maybe you can't put your arm around them. I probably still do, and might get in trouble with HR. But, you know, just remember that it's not all about you. It's about other people and their problems. Everyone's problems are relevant. Everyone's problems are massive to them. You know, I've got a teenage son and heartbreak. Oh my God, you know, talk about take me back. So I just think you've sort of got to think about how you conduct yourself as well.
Yeah, just recognizing that everyone's human and we've all got our own things going on. It's not all about work for everyone.
And I think employers should foster a culture where you are open about things that are going on in your life. I think the idea that you are sort of, I think in senior people in the business explaining that life can be tough. You know, I have moments where I'm in a meeting and I forget a word for something and I just go menopause now, and they all sort of look at me like, and I've got that to contend with, as well as these, you know, caring responsibilities. And I think, you know, being honest with employers, being honest with other people around you about what that looks like, what that means, don't expect that a 25-year-old is going to understand what it's like to look after a small child. Don't also expect that your boss understands what it's like to have an elderly parent with a problem, because they might not have experienced that themselves. And be honest with the people around you, be honest with your friends about, you know, don't go out on that Thursday night if you really just can't face it, or talk to your partner about how you're going to juggle. And I have a real problem with the fact that you have a child and suddenly everyone thinks it's just the mother's responsibility to do everything. I don't understand. I didn't sign up for that. I didn't see the contract that said it all fell on me. And I think I've tried to be much more honest and open about that as well.
Yeah, well, I guess coming back to your point about being more vocal about parenting responsibilities at work, and I guess just generally what's going on in your life, so that those big moments don't sort of get bottled up. There's a guy called Elliot Ray, actually, who does a Parenting Out Loud campaign, and that's all about enabling dads to be more vocal at work so that they can take on some of the more of the responsibility, which I think is really good. But yeah, I think I absolutely agree. Being able to be more vocal and employers fostering an environment where that is possibility is massively important. I guess on the flip side, there is a bit of a sort of a perception, I suppose, if you are more open about your sort of struggles, whether that's as a working parent, as a carer, whatever it might be, that there's a perception that working parents, potentially more often mums, are seen as having less time and therefore less commitment to work, or whatever it might be. That can be a stereotype that then might lead to them being overlooked for promotions or like important projects and that kind of thing. Have you ever faced any of those assumptions in your own career, and how do people kind of juggle that, wanting to be very vocal about their issues and what's going on, but also not wanting to show their vulnerability, I suppose?
Yeah, I think I took quite an extreme step, because I had my own business that I left because of some of the challenges. I'd had a divorce. My son was experiencing some mental health challenges, and I just basically got I got to the stage where I realized that the journey that I was on with my business was just not going to be compatible. I felt that it had worked for quite a long time, but it wasn't going to anymore. And it's quite hard actually that when I then went out into the market and thought, gosh, I've got to get a job now, I'd gone from it not being an issue because it was my business to the complete flip side. And okay, I was lucky that I was probably considered to be more senior in the industry at that point, but I don't actually think anybody at any point sort of expressed any concern about my ability to do the job. But I think that, to my point about like helping people out when you can and doing the right thing when you can, being really good at your job when you can, and when you're having to take time out or things are a bit difficult, being in touch, being able to check in, even if it means that you're reviewing an email later at night and so the team get the response in the morning, like being present when you can be, giving as much as you can when you can, is all stuff that then will reinforce why you're good and you're worth having on board. But I also think that, you know, if you are thinking of working for someone where being a parent is a problem, then actually think about whether that is the right place for you. And I know, you know, I'm not saying, oh, there's so many jobs out there that it's that easy, but at the same time, I think, don't set yourself up for something that is going to make you so miserable, because you're just never going to convince that person. If you've got a real dinosaur of a business owner or a real dinosaur of a boss, just, you know, I think having that conversation early, maybe in the recruitment process, not saying you need to take a lot of time off, but just saying, you know, there is one day a week where I will need to leave early, or there is there is a Tuesday afternoon where I'd need to work from home. And actually it might be easier I work from home the whole day. Is that compatible with the business's, you know, approach? It just means that I'm quicker to leave to pick up from nursery, for example. I don't know, whatever it might be. But I think having that conversation, seeing what the reaction is during the recruitment process, I think it's a more honest approach for everybody. You know, I know it's different when you are employed and you have children, and then you've got to work out how that's going to work. But that's, while it's hard, it's also easier because the business has got a responsibility for you. But also you understand the rhythm of the business and you can see what other people have done. But when you're going into a firm, it's not really fair to not be honest and then expect them to be able to fit around you when you've said you're going to join. Like, I think it is a two-way street. And I've been on that other side as the employer, as a business owner who's got to juggle those things. So I think we should also recognise, and I'm going to blow my own trumpet here, I know I'm bloody good at what I do, and I can be very effective in a short amount of time when I'm focused, when I'm briefed, and when I'm engaged. And I would go out on the street now and I would find you a gazillion parents who I believe will fit that same mold. I think there is something about people that have to do that juggle, that we are incredibly focused. We've got to get it done. We haven't got 4 hours to chat about it. We're under pressure, and sometimes deadlines are really good for us. Sometimes deadlines do. If you give me too long to think about something, I'll have tidied 10 rooms in the house and achieved bugger all in terms of what I needed to do. When I've got a deadline, I'm incredibly focused. I'm incredibly good at sort of getting to the crux of things. But I also recognize that I am somebody that does sort of feed off of other people's energy, which means if I did have to work at home for a bit, I would end up with a bunch of people doing a brainstorm online, and we'd end up with a Teams call just to sort of get that, try and recreate as much of that dynamic that I'd have in the office. Also means that when I am in the office, I am very rarely sat at a screen. I am generally with colleagues having meeting after meeting after meeting. And I come out and I'm like, ooh, you know, I'm literally like fizzing because I've had all this energy from other people. And then I use my time at home to do that. So there is a, you know, I wouldn't say I've had discrimination. I wouldn't say I've had particular problems. I did very early on in my career. I had a woman boss who was incredibly difficult about me having to look after my mum. And I actually recorded a conversation. I secretly recorded a conversation because I just had a feeling it wasn't going to be very good. I never had to use it, but it was a political boss, and it was quite a shock to me. And I decided that I was going to be incredibly vocal about the fact that I needed to do what I needed to do. And I had other senior support, and I got through the process. But believe me, I was very shocked at the time that it happened, but I was also much less vocal, much less open at that stage in my life than I am now. I mean, 25 years ago, a lot's happened since then.
Yeah, I guess the industry and society has changed so much in terms of kind of opinions and beliefs around kind of work-life balance and flexible working for everyone, not just carers or parents. So I guess it is a little bit easier now to have those conversations. But yeah, I suppose has the industry come a long enough way, or is there more work to be done?
I don't know. I think part of the work is something we have to all do along the way, because if you think about it, a business can say, as a PR, say for instance, a PR agency, can say they have a particular dynamic or way of working, but ultimately we're a service business, right? So it actually depends about how our clients respond and how our clients work with us. If we've got a client that just wants to do their meetings over lunch on a Wednesday at a particular restaurant, and that clashes with something very significant in your life, but that is never going to be a compatible relationship. Like, something's got to give. And I think that that way of working's kind of being phased out massively. It doesn't really exist in the same way. So I think the problem is that it is partly about how we all conduct ourselves, and therefore how we foster those relationships with our clients. And I've even found myself talking to clients about parenting challenges, and then, sort of saying, does that Thursday meeting actually work for you? Because it sounds like you're always rushing to it. Do you want us to move it? Would it be better if we did it at a different time? And suddenly you get a kind of, actually, yeah, like, it would be really good if we could move that. What works for you? And we've had just a negotiation, like two grown-ups would do, like setting a date, Yeah. But it's almost like, has anyone got the balls in that relationship to actually just say it?
First move,
And that is partly about, I think it's to the same point about your team. It's about recognizing when you've got that client agency relationship, about developing that sort of, fostering that kind of trust and environment where you can have a really honest conversation and just say, I'm not giving my best at 10:30 on a Thursday morning, but if we could do Wednesday afternoon, my God, that would be so much easier, or whatever. Like, I know it's not necessarily that easy, but I think it's about getting to a point where those conversations can happen.
And that comes back to your point about fostering an environment and a culture where people feel like they can have those conversations, and it's not such a big deal to kind of be open about things. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. I could speak to you for many hours about this topic. I really could. And I think you've given us some amazing tips and insights and nuggets of information. But I guess if there was just one piece of advice amongst all of that, for anyone in your situation that might be caring for both a child and a parent, and is perhaps new to kind of one of those roles and is struggling to see how they might be able to work it alongside their career, what would your kind of your top thing be for them?
I think my top tip would be honest. And by be honest with yourself first and foremost. Be honest with yourself about what you can do and what you can't do. And you have to recognize that when you are taking on another responsibility, something in your life might have to give. And that might mean that that job that you were doing, or that part of the role that you did, might not actually be possible anymore. And it might be an open conversation with your boss about, is there something that could flex in that role? Or is it that a different role would suit you entirely? Or is actually the culture of that business going to mean it's never, ever going to work? So I think there is an honesty with yourself that you have to start with, because what does this new responsibility actually mean for me? And, it's not just about sitting down and saying to your partner, we've now got a child and we now need childcare. What is the cost of that? It's also, what is the structure of that?
Yeah.
Is it realistic that you're going to make the school run at X time? Or is it realistic that actually for your firm, you work 5 days a week, but you do short days, and that makes it work, rather than doing 3 days and becoming a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's about really be honest with yourself about the pressures, and be honest with yourself about the opportunities, and talk to people about how you might solve those challenges. Because believe me, I've seen people do some really clever ways of working to make those things work. But then be honest with your employer about what those pressures mean, what you realistically think might be doable, but also how might that work for an employer? And does that mean a job share? Does that mean somebody that you buddy up with, that one of you is always on that meeting, because between the two of you, you cover it off brilliantly, but one of you could do a good job if one of you wasn't around? Is your client team structure, or is your business structure, is your corporate affairs team or your PR department, does it have the right balance of people and skills, and actually people that have availability on the time you might not? So I think honesty is for me the really big key, because we can try to, you know, fit square pegs in round holes for as long as we like, and what actually happens is everyone ends up miserable.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes it is about recognizing that we're told as women in particular, I know this was about parenting, and I actually think not enough focus is put on men, because I think often men feel they can't talk about being a parent, and they really should.
Yeah.
But I also think that what is important is that women sort of grew up, we were sort of the generation that thought we could have it all. We were sort of told we could have it all. And in reality, we can't. We can have a really big chunk of it, but it's not necessarily always the case that we can have it all. And that doesn't mean we failed.
No.
The other bits of our lives are incredibly rewarding, and we should appreciate them as much as we can.
I think that's amazing, Joe. I honestly could, like I say, I could talk to you about this for so long, but yeah, honesty being the key, and yeah, recognizing that it's not necessarily the be all and end all to have it all, I think is a really good place to finish. So,
and find people. You're doing a great job by showcasing people that have been in this situation. Find people to talk to. Find them on LinkedIn. Send them a question. Send me a question. Ask me out for a cup of tea. I love an Earl Grey. Talk to me. Tell me what your problems are, and I'll see if I can work out a way. Other people that have been there will share advice and will be willing to support. So it's a great thing you're doing. I think it's really important. I wish I'd heard from people when I was going through it myself.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for being so honest and being so open today. I really appreciate you chatting to me. And yeah, thanks for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.